Today, I would like to present information theory and living systems through the lens of communication engineering. In this part of the presentation, I will talk about the birth of information theory and the Shannon sampling theorem. In 1948, Claude Shannon published his famous paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication. With this work, Shannon proved that information, just like mass or energy, can be measured as a physical quantity. He introduced the concept of the bit, which became the foundation of modern digital communication. Today, technologies such as the internet, digital communication systems, artificial intelligence, and data transmission are all based on Shannon's ideas. Secondly, I would like to talk about signal discretization and the Kotelnikov-Shannon sampling theorem. Signals in the real world are analog, meaning they are continuous. However, computers and digital systems cannot process continuous signals directly. Therefore, these signals must be sampled at specific intervals and converted into digital form. According to theorem, in order to digitize a signal without losing information, the sampling frequency must be at least twice the highest frequency component of the signal. Interestingly, a similar process can also be observed in a living systems. All stimuli in this outside world, such as light, sound, and temperature, are analog. However, the human brain and nervous system cannot process this continuous information directly. Instead, they convert these signals into electrical impulses called action potentials. In this sense, nature itself can be seen as a perfect sampling and signal processing system. And in the academic world, information theory has traditionally been used as a tool to better understand biology. Scientists and researchers ask questions such as how much information DNA can store or what the bandwidth of nerves might be. In other words, engineering theories are used to analyze biological systems. However, this article introduced the opposite perspective, which is called the inverse problem. Instead of using engineering to understand biology, we use biology to inspire new engineering solutions. Nature has been developing highly efficient systems for billions of years through DNA replication, neural communication, and cellular signaling. By studying this natural process, we can discover new ideas for encryption, compression, and error correction methods in modern telecommunication systems. The main idea is that biology is not just something to analyze, but also a source of inspiration for future technologies. And modern communication systems such as 5G networks, fiber optic infrastructures, and large data centers are designed to achieve maximum speed and perfect optimization. However, this comes with significant disadvantages, including high energy consumption, massive processing requirements, and large carbon emissions. Nature, on the other hand, follows a completely different philosophy. Its primary goal is not perfection, but survivability and efficiency. Although natural systems may not always be mathematically optimal, they are extremely energy efficient, resilient, and sustainable. For example, the human brain can process enormous amounts of information while consuming less energy than a light bulb. Biological systems are also highly resistant to damage, meaning information can survive even under radiation or mutation. In addition, nature systems are fully reusable and environmentally friendly. These characteristics suggest that future engineering solutions may benefit greatly from adopting nature-inspired approaches focused on sustainability rather than pure performance. And okay. Synapses are the connection points between nerve cells and they play a critical role in neural communication. When an electrical signal reaches a synapse, the signal temporarily stops and chemical neurotransmitters are released to transfer information to the next neuron. Compared to electrical transmission, this process is relatively slow. It can be compared to physical connectors in computer networks where poor quality connections may introduce delay and resistance into the communication line. Another important concept is that neural communication is not purely digital. In the past, scientists believed that only digital signals represent as ones and zeros could travel through synapse. However, recent findings in neurobiology show that small analog voltage fluctuations, even those believed below the threshold required to trigger a full neural pulse, can also propagate through neural pathways without disappearing. This means the nervous system is capable of carrying both analog and digital signals simultaneously. Such hybrid communication models may provide valuable inspiration for developing more flexible and efficient future communication technologies. And nature loosely compression algorithm is one of the clearest examples showing how our biological world of perception perfectly intersects with modern digital engineering. According to what is known in the scientific world as the Weber-Feiner law, the way our brain perceives physical stimuli such as light intensity, sound decibels, or weight is not linear but logarithmic. In other words, nature compresses all incoming inputs from our environment using a mathematical logarithm principle before transmitting them to our brain. If our nervous system used linear perception instead of this compression, our nerve lines would either have to operate at an incredibly low sensitivity or expand a massive data bandwidth just to transmit the microwave difference created by a tiny feather falling on our hand. This would lead to an extreme overload in information flow and the QE delay, turning the processing and delivery of that tiny feather signal into a cumbersome process that could take hours. However, nature allows us to react within milliseconds against dangers by instantly compressing large data. Humanity has copied this wonderful technique of nature one to one in the field of telecommunication and engineering. When the human voice is digitized, a linear method is not followed. Instead, special logarithmic comparison algorithms are used to clip high amplitude sound details that our ears are already not sensitive to. Today, the famous 64 kilobytes standard voice band on telephone lines is entirely a direct projection of nature perception system into engineering. Likewise, the MP3 format used today works on the exact same logic by deleting sound frequencies we cannot hear, and the JPEG format does so by filtering out color details our eyes cannot distinguish through loosey comparison. When we look at the nature's large-scale communication and data storage engineering, we encounter the structure of DNA, which shows a flawless parallel with computer architecture. While the nerve lines in our bodies act like REM, performing instant data transmission, DNA serves as a permanent hard drive or ROM that stores data for billions of years and passes it down from generation to generation. This magnificent system transports data both in time through intergenerational inheritance and in space through the migration and movement of the organism. While our computers process data using a binary alphabet consisting only of zeros and ones, nature uses a four-letter quaternary alphabet in the DNA, namely adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. If nature had also used a binary alphabet like our computers, the length of the billions of characters data chain in the human genome would multiply astronomically. This situation would cause the DNA helix to physically not fit inside the cell. the energy spent during copying to increase uncontrollably, and data scanning speed to drop. Nature optimized the strand length and embodied storage space perfectly by enlarging the alphabet size. Furthermore, these four letters in DNA come together in groups of three to form codon structures, creating a total of 64 different combinations. These 64 combinations encode 20 different amino acids, which are the building blocks of the body, corresponding exactly to multiplexing and hierarchical packing in telecommunication engineering. Just like assigning every 3 bits to a single subnode in telecommunications to transmit data more efficiently. Nature packs data and performs multiplexing through these codons. When we look at nature's error control mechanisms, we see that the principles of information theory in the computing world have been flawlessly applied in biological systems for millions of years. The most fundamental rule of information theory is adding extra protection bits, known as redundancy. Alongside the data, the double helix structure of DNA, where adenine always pairs with thymine and guanine with cytosine, is an excellent hardware redundancy system developed by nature. Even if one strand of the helix is damaged, the data can be repaired flawlessly by looking at the opposite strand. What we call a bit error in the digital world, where a 1 is written instead of a 0, corresponds directly to the incorrect nucleotide matching we know as a mutation in biology. Similarly, the timing synchronization error that completely shifts the data stream in digital systems. When receiver and transmitter clocks fall out of sign is the biological twin of strand slippage, where the copying enzyme skips or adds an extra nucleotide. To prevent these bugs, the cell executes a dual stage protection protocol. First, an instant check is performed during the copying process, and then a second scanning mechanism is initiated for any missed errors. Thanks to this dual stage protocol, which closely resembles nested advanced error correcting codes. In engineering, the ultimate residual error rate is dropped down to an incredibly low 1 in a billion chance. Even in global fiber optic telecommunication networks, the system triggers an alarm and considers the line broken at much higher error rates, proving that nature provides a communication infrastructure exponentially more reliable and stable than human engineering. And when we look at nature's high-level error control and cryptography capabilities, we encounter a mind-blowing parallel with cybersecurity engineering. In communication engineering, because the header information of a data packet is highly critical, it is protected with much stronger algorithms than the data body, a concept known as unequivocal error protection. This exact logic exists in nature as well. In three-letter codon structures, the first two letters are highly critical and heavily protected, while the third letter is flexible. For instance, when we examine four different codon combinations that produce the alanine amino acid, we see that the first two letters remain completely fixed, and regardless of that, the third letter turns into the final outcome never change. This means that even if a mutation or error occurs in the third bit during copying, the produced protein is never corrupted. Nature has secured vital information with a structural fault tolerance algorithm. On the cybersecurity side, there is an even more fascinating similarity: asymmetric encryption algorithms in cybergraphy, cryptography. Like RSA, rely on uh, mathematical functions. In other words, it is incredibly easy to multiply two large prime numbers to generate a public key. But working backwards from that product to find the private key, the original prime factors, is nearly impossible. DNA works exactly the same way. It is very easy to find which amino acid will be formed from a given codon sequence by looking at the cyber table, but when you have a complete protein sequence and try to work backward to find the exact original codon combination that produced it, it becomes mathematically near impossible. This is due to the astronomically high number of combination possibilities that create a one-way complexity, making DNA the very first living example of asymmetric encryption in nature. And in addition to the loosely compression genius we saw in the earlier slides, nature also possesses a brilliant lossless compression. Logic similar to what we know today from modern zip or gzip technologies. In our computers, data is traditionally stored such that one file ends and another file begins. However, nature utilizes an overlapping architecture that pushes limits, particularly in space constrained versus and certain human genes. According to this system, the exact same nucleotide sequence can code for a complete different gen when the reading frame is shifted by just one character. And when shifted by two characters, it codes for an entirely different third gene. In other words, three distinct functional files are extracted from a single data sequence without any loss of information. Mathematically, this sharing of overlapping segments relies on exact same principle as the famous LZ77 dictionary algorithm used in computer engineering, which saves space by placing pointers to previous location instead of repeating words, just like computers overlap data blocks through buffer zone matching to maximize storage efficiency. Nature reads the exact same data sequence from different starting angles to optimize limited space, presenting the most organic model of lossless comparison. In digital communication, data doesn't simply flow randomly. Through the air or a cable, the receiver must know exactly where the actual data packet begins within the stream of incoming bits, a process we call frame synchronization. Nature uses this exact same method to mark the starting points of genes on the DNA strand, just like the special bit sequence of synchronization. Markers we add to the beginning of packets in the engineering. The cell utilizes specific nucleotide sequence that the RNA polymerase enzyme looks for while sliding along the chain. The moment the enzyme recognizes this sequence, it essentially signals that the packet starts here and begins reading. However, there is a very critical philosophical difference between human engineering and nature. Our communication standards are 100% rigid and fixed. If even a single bit divides, the packet is dropped immediately. In nature, however, these start markers are flexible. They do not have to match perfectly, and structures that closely resemble the standard sequence are gladly accepted as a biological consensus. By utilizing flexible probability calculations rather than strict, unyielding rules, nature exponentially increases the fault tolerance of the system, allowing it to maintain perfect synchronization for millions of years. We have seen how data packets start, but how do we signal the receiver that a packet has ended? In digital communication, a special stop byte is used to indicate that a packet has concluded. However, while a user file is being transmitted, the exact same sequence as the stop byte may coincidentally appear within within the raw data of the file itself. If the receiver encounters this, it falsely assumes that file has ended, and the data stream is cut off halfway to prevent this error in human-made computer networks. Protocols at the OSI data link layer mandatorily skews escape character right in front of those fake stop signals. A process known as byte stuffing, this workaround both strains the processor and enlarges the packet, creating unnecessary overhead on the communication line. Nature's smart solution here is an absolute engineering victory. Out of the 64 codon combination in DNA, 3 of them are stop codons. This most magnificent engineering secret of nature is that these 3 stop codons have no amino acid equivalent at the cellular level. This means the mathematical probability of these codons accidentally mixing into normal data during the protein synthesis flow is exactly zero. By completely separating the stop signals from the functional amino acid alphabet, nature entirely bypassed the need for a byte stuffing mechanism without requiring any escape characters or extra overhead. This represents nature's definitive